You're welcome to the Industry Hub of the Law FM Morning Show.
Thanks for staying tuned. Let's get down to the conversation. So, in an era where personal data has become the new oil, the need for robust data protection measures has never been more critical. In Nigeria, the journey towards comprehensive data protection regulation has been marked by significant milestones and persistent effort, and the issuance of the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation of 2019, followed by the establishment of the Nigeria Data Protection Bureau in 2022, were crucial steps in this direction. However, stakeholders have long anticipated more robust and enforceable legislation to regulate and address the challenges of the emerging data protection and privacy. Guess what? On the 14th of June, just a few days ago, President Bola Tinubu signed into law the Data Protection Act 2023. And the objective of the act, amongst others, is to safeguard fundamental rights and freedoms and the interest of data subjects as guaranteed under the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And that is what we're talking about today. By the way, the act establishes the Nigeria Data Protection Commission and replaces the Nigeria Data Protection Bureau established by former President Buhari. And that act focuses on crucial aspects such as the processing of personal data, protection of data subjects' rights, the establishment of a data protection commission, data security, cross-border data transfers, and data breach management. And that is the focus today. Let's help you understand that the new Nigeria Data Protection Act 2023. And joining us to do that this morning is Emmanuel. And I'm not. Hopefully, I get this right. We've talked about this off the mic, but hopefully, I get the name right again. Emmanuel Agherario, right? He's an associate at the Olisa Agbakoba Legal, and he's sports, entertainment, and technology practice group, right? Yeah. So, Emmanuel is here to talk to us about that this morning. A very good morning to you, and thanks for joining us.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure coming on air to talk on some of the implications and tangibility with respect to the Data Protection Act just newly passed into law.
Interesting. There you go. Okay, so let's begin the conversation, shall we?
All right. Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for joining us today. So I think before we go into the comparison between the new one and the former, I think there's a need to explain some terminology so that our listeners can, follow you. So I think you can start with the data processor and what the data means itself and why are we protecting, data itself. Thank you.
Okay. First, I want to say now data controller as the Act uses, because there are some terminology just like she said, and some of the most important terminologies used in the Act is data controller and data processor. Now, a data controller means an individual or private entity or entity that process data that are to be used for any specific purpose. Now, once you processing data, once you collect, once you store, and once you process any of this data, you're referred to as a data controller or a data processor. However, the article made some certain exception with respect to which persons that process or control data will not be subjected to the regulations of the Act. And some of those instances is with respect to private individuals who process data for personal and equally with respect to household use. now those persons are exempted. Equally, persons with respect that are authorized to process data for prevention of crime, national interest, earth use are equally exempted under the Act with respect to the regulations as stipulated in the Data Protection Act.
All right. I'd like you to maybe dwell a little bit more. Give examples of these persons exempted. You've mentioned them broadly, but maybe more specifically.
Okay. Specifically, when you talk about the Economic and Financial Crime Commission, the EFCC, for example, they might need to assess and process some certain data of individuals for purposes of prosecuting crime. These agencies are regarded as authorized persons. So these persons, with respect to the Act, are not subjected to the regulations as stipulated in the Act.
Interesting. So let's talk about these regulations that they've been exempted from, being bound to. You want to mention them, and well, maybe that might cause a little bit, more complication. But so that we can break this down, as Daniella, did pose, break this down a little bit more. What does this even mean for the average Nigerian? Why should I, Kingsley, Bassey, be interested in data protection and this new legislation?
Now, one of the key reasons for which persons should be interested with respect to data protection is because data protection relates to personal information that relates to individuals. For example, the Act made provisions for sensitive personal data. Now, when you talk about sensitive personal data, you can be talking about issues of ethnicity. You'll be talking about issues of persons' political belief, and we know as a nation issues of religion. These are critical issues that if you touch upon them without getting the consent of those persons, then you want to create, for example, an uprising. If you say something regarding Christians, for example, and persons of those beliefs don't take it lightly with you, it could cause an uprising. So they said, for you to make mention of some certain things or process those data, you must get the consent of the organizations or group of persons that are concerned. So it is important that as an individual, you might not want someone to disclose your health status. So it is sensitive personal data. So it is of importance that you give your consent to such before it can be processed. That's why you see, before now, we have the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation, which stipulates that if you are operating or you have a website, you must have data protection policy or privacy policy for which persons that are coming to your website can either give consent, whether you should collect, store, or keep their information. So that's one of the ways for which those persons will agree to, I want to come to your website. You can collect or store some of my informations.
Yeah, and we live in a country where we use devices, right? And we're not particularly concerned. Sometimes we hop on sites that probably we've heard of things like these sites, take that data without necessarily seeking the consent or approval of the users and the rest. And I want that before we get into maybe the complicated side, I will dwell on this and help Nigerians understand why this particular legislation is important and why maybe we should pay attention to this even further. So would the protection that this brings, that this legislation brings, would it include data on your device, for example, and also like calls, messages, and the rest? Does that include that? Help us understand.
Yes, when you say data means any means for which information can be gathered. It could be an electronic means, it could be by paper means, any means for which information can be gathered. And one of the most important means for which information has been gathered in the 21st century is electronically. Persons use their phone, persons use their devices, and people now even refer to that as the new oil. You see, for persons to even want to predict and say, can I win a particular election, they want to collect data, the data of the information of a particular group of persons, and often the time these data are collated electronically, and persons might even want to reach out to individuals to tell them to vote for me. you're breaching the privacy of these persons because you collected their data, which is their phone number. Some of these persons can even raise objections and say, how did you get my phone number? The basis for which you're not sending me a test for me to vote for you. That's a breach of my privacy, because data protection is an offshoot of the right to privacy, which is a constitutional guaranteed right.
Interesting. And then that we established that, because ordinarily when we're having conversations like this, the average Nigerian listening via the radio would maybe not be interested, and because it feels like plenty grammar. It feels like, oh, you're saying this won't bring food to my table like immediately right now, or this doesn't necessarily concern me as Nigerian. And so you've heard the explanation from here. This is about you and it concerns you, and there's a legislation for that purpose. So let's continue the conversation.
All right, so just before we start with the comparison, I think there's also a need for you to try and expatiate further on the data privacy to people, the implications, you understand it? Because sometimes, like you said, there's sometimes you get messages and you're wondering from where, how, when, and do you understand? And the need for Nigerians to be particular when it comes to the protection of their privacy.
Now, the issues of privacy are very sensitive, and as such, I enjoy everyone to pay attention to issues of privacy. You see, as an organization, your entire organization could be collapsed just because a sensitive file or information was accessed without authorization. Somebody can even get your trade secret as someone trading in the business place or market just because your particular information was accessed without consent and process. Someone can even get health details with respect to an individual and use it as a means for criticism, or as a means for ridicule, or as a means to drag down national security. So these are sensitive information. Sometimes you see we hear that the DSS raise alarm and say, oh, so some set of persons are trying to do this. How did they get that? Because they were able to process and breach the data of these persons, and they saw that some of these informations that are being leaked at and being passed are against national interest, and as such they draw the intentions of Nigerians and of the countries to be aware that, oh, some persons are trying to raise false alarm, some persons are trying to do this, there is likely going to be this. So it is data that is being collected and stored that enables these informations to come out.
So how or what are the protections available in the new legislation for Nigerians in terms of their data, and how would the now empowered commission, affect this?
Now, under the 2023 Data Protection Act, it now makes provision for specific rights of data subjects. Now, as a data subject, you have one of such rights you have is the right with respect to consent. You can give consent for persons to process your information. You can equally withdraw consent from persons not to process your information. You can equally ask and say, data controller, data processor, which of my information are you processing? I want to know, for what purpose are you processing that information? Which audience or group of persons will have access or have been given access to this particular information? Is it within this Nigeria that persons will have access to it, or it will be international organizations that will have access to this particular information? Then you can equally go to the essence of saying, no, I want to correct a particular fact that does not reflect or depict my details. So you can specifically ask with respect to this particular act now for some certain things to be removed. Now, the act even went further to talk about legitimate interest assessment. This was not contained in the previous act. Now, legitimate interest assessment gives persons or business owners that need this information for their businesses. Like I said, data is the new oil, and a lot of online businesses and small businesses will not be able to do well if they don't have access to information. So based on legitimate interest assessments, these persons can process some of this data for their business purposes.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. I must say, Emmanuel understands the assignment. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So now I think it's time for us to dive into, the Nigerian Data Protection Act 2023. What exactly are the novel provisions in this particular act?
Okay, some of the novel provisions in this particular act is with respect to the establishment of the Nigeria Data Protection Commission. Now, before now, we don't have the Nigeria Data Protection Commission. The Act now established specifically a commission that is saddled with that responsibility of regulating protection of data issues and equally related issues. It went further to establish the Governing Council. Now we now have a Governing Council for which this Governing Council can now make regulations and rules with respect to data protections and privacy issues in Nigeria. It went equally further to talk about the issues of principles and lawful basis governing processing of data. That was what I was saying. Now there are not specific principles that you must adhere to and lawful basis for which you can process some of this data. Now if you want to process data, you must process data in a fair, in a lawful way, and in a transparent manner. And equally those data must be consistent, and equally those data must not be misleading. So you can't say a particular data of an individual that you get is misleading. No, it must be the correct information of that particular individual that you're processing. It went further to talk about issues of data privacy impact assessment. Now these are situations for which you look at and say, oh, this particular data I'm trying to process is of high risk. And in such situation, the Commission is saying, notify the Commission. If a particular data will be of high risk to an individual or a data subject, then the Commission should be notified so that the individual will know of the likelihood or impact of that particular risk. And situations where there is data breach, the individual should equally be notified to, oh, this particular data has been breached. These are the likely things that could occur, but equally there are measures in place being put to ensure that those data are quickly recovered and equally restored for the security of that particular individual. Then I talk about sensitive data and equally child rights. Now before now we don't have issues of child rights in our data protection act, but now it specifically states that if it relates to processing of data for children, you need the consent of their guardians. You must get the consent of their guardians. You can't say because they are children, they are not of adult age. So you know, it says specifically that you must get their guardians' consent, even though it equally raised an issue. And one of such issues that it raised is the age of a child. Now, the age of a child under our Data Protection Act was reduced to 13 years, which to me is an issue because under the Child Rights Act, the age of a child is 18. The age of an adult is from 18 and above. So you're not saying persons from 13 and below. So there's an issue of conflict there. So even though the Act has notable and good provisions, there are equally some ugly and bad provisions.
Yeah, maybe we should get down to that. The concerns that you have with the new legislation.
Okay. With respect to the new legislation, one of my major concerns is just what I raised with the issue of what a child is. Another of my concern with respect to the legislation is as it relates to the issue of submitting audit reports and having instruction from the Minister of Communication. Now, the independence of the Commission is not being put in question, because they are not truly independent if you are going to be taking instruction from the Minister of Communication.
So the commission, the newly established commission, according to this Act of 2023, would now be directly under the Minister of Communication.
Yes, and they need to take instruction from the Minister of Communication, submit an annual audit and report to the National Assembly through the Minister of Communication. So you're subjecting the commission to the direction and directive of the Minister of Communication, so that independence will not become an issue in question. Then issue of licensing.
But I'm sorry, just a sec. I'm trying to process why that's a problem, considering that it's an agency of government and they need to be under, as an agency or a department, they need to be under a ministry.
To be accountable.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why it is a problem is because issue of persons wanting to now direct what it should be. Because when you establish a commission, it's established as a body corporate independent. It's established as a body corporate independent, and as such it should be able to make regulations, advise the government on things with respect to data protection. It ought to be independent. The minute it starts taking instructions, directions from a third party, it will influence the decision making process of the body, because it already have a governing council that ordinarily can come together and take decisions by way of resolution. Now, for example, if you have a company and you have board of directors of a company, the board of directors ordinarily should be the body or the annual AGM that takes decision with respect to the company. Now, if you now have a third party for which the decisions taken by the AGM or board of directors can be easily overridden, becomes an issue to question the independence of that particular company. That's the case here.
Interesting. We've got to begin to close on this segment this morning, but let's take a few more thoughts before we do so.
Yes, I would like you to talk on the cross-border data transfers that the Act 2023 Act now makes provision for.
Okay, when you talk about cross-border transfer, now simply you talk about data to another country or jurisdiction. Now simply what the Act does is that for you to transfer data to another country or jurisdiction, you must ensure that that country or jurisdiction has similar laws for which any of these data subjects they will be bound by some of these provisions. So you cannot just say, you're transferring data. And it equally empowers the Commission to equally blacklist countries, list of countries that you cannot transfer data to. That no, this particular country, data cannot be transferred to them because it is so porous. There are issues of breach. There are issues of information just getting hard. So for me to transfer data to another country, they must have similar law. For example, you have in Europe, you have the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. So countries like that have similar laws for which data can be transferred and processed.
Are there countries that you can mention real quick that do not have similar laws as Nigeria?
For now, I think one of such countries that I know, it's Malaysia. I don't think there's any particular similar law with respect to data privacy issues.
Yeah. Okay, so that's on cross-border data transfers.
Yeah, so just because we have to wrap up, I have a final question for you. And I know you mentioned earlier data subject. I would believe that we are the data subject. So in the event where your privacy as a data subject has been breached, what remedy do they have?
Now, as a data subject, you can report to the Commission that any of your data related issue has been breached or collected or stored or processed without your consent, and the Commission can sanction such body by way of imposing a penalty, fine, and there's equally issues for criminal prosecution. So the Commission and equally they have made room for criminal prosecution with respect to breach of any of the data issues or privacy of a data subject.
Which brings me to the default part as per one who breaches this data protection or the provisions of the Data Protection Act 2023 cites what you've just mentioned now, that other punishments that one would go through or that such persons would have to go through. You want to provide that because of course it's okay to state what the law provides and the rest, but let's talk about the flip side, those who would go do things against the provisions of the act. What are their punishments?
Now, like I said, specifically there are penalties that the Commission can use, and equally the Commission can impose fines on such individuals. You can equally be prosecuted criminally. That it means you can go to prison. Is
it open? Is it at the discretion of the Commission, or they are provided for?
No, the Commission there's specific provisions. For example, you have forfeiture. You can forfeit any of your things. All of those information stored and everything can be collected. There is equally civil remedies available, and say, because you breached my information, I have suffered this amount of damage, and as such I'm claiming this amount of remedy against you. So you have civil suit against you, claiming for any particular amount of money that person can assess as reasonable or in compensation for such breach. Some persons can tell you 5 million, 10 million, 25 million for such breach, and some persons will not end there. They can simultaneously institute both a civil action and a criminal action, saying no, for such breach you should go to prison, and the minimum period is 1 year imprisonment.
All right, we've been talking about the new legislation signed a few days ago, about a week ago, right, by President Bola Tinubu. That's the Data Protection Act 2023, and we've been talking to Emmanuel Agherario, Esquire, Associate to Olisa Agbakoba Legal, and his specialization is sports, entertainment, and technology. We appreciate you for coming. Thank you so much for talking to us. And there's a lot that we need to talk about. But as many stakeholders have mentioned, and including yourself, the Nigeria Data Protection Act is indeed a welcome legislation, regardless of some of the flaws and uncertainties that might be provided for there. And from the examination, data controllers and data processors are given a higher responsibility to match the high level of accountability that's expected of an organization entrusted with the personal data of data subject. Some persons might have been confused in some way what data controllers, data processors, and data subjects means. But maybe in coming days you understand someone, and we should encourage people to also do their research as well and learn themselves what these things really mean. Take time, take some time out to study some of these things by yourself, so that you can make informed decisions. Again, thank you so much, Emmanuel, for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I
appreciate it. That's the show this morning. Special thanks to Legal Counsel Daniella Ajayi again, day 2. How do you feel?
Thank you very much. You owe me one.
I do. I owe you 2. It's 2 days. I'll you 2 then. Alrighty. Thank you so much for being out there as well, for being a part of the conversation on the Law FM Morning Show today. We'll see you again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Kingsley, Bassey is my name. Do have fun and keep it locked here. Daniella will be here till 11:30. She has Women's Web coming through, and she has this amazing conversation she wants to talk to you about. You want to stay tuned for that as well. See you again. Bye for now.